Right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good to have some old faces back as well. So we're in part 5 of the personal transformation series, and today we are looking at transforming personal stories. Right. So far in the series we've been looking at various ways of inner transformation. How do we undertake the inner journey by ourselves? We started off with talking about the idea of the human persona being like an iceberg, and how do we start accessing the under the water level part of the iceberg, which contains our psyche, including our needs, values, beliefs, and so on. Then we spoke about the idea of frames in the sense of the frames that through which we see the world, the window through which we see the world, and if we reframe, if we change the way we look at it, then the worldview changes as well. We also spoke about the tool of using body, emotions, and language, using any of these as keys to access our frames, our worldview, and how do we shift our stance using any one of these mechanisms, or sometimes all of these together as well. The idea being that if at any given point in time we can consciously stay at the center of awareness in terms of our body, emotion, and language, if we're equally connected with all three, it's really easy to shift stances. It's very easy to stay present to the world. And the last time we spoke about the idea of life sentences, how we sometimes at a very early age imbibe beliefs, some of which serve us, they're good for us, a lot of which are not very good for us. You know, statements like I'm bad at math, or the world is unfair, or men are dangerous. Each of these statements then becomes like a life sentence. We are in a way caging ourselves around that sentence, and some of these sentences don't serve us at all, and therefore it becomes important to overcome and release ourselves from those sentences. Today we're going to be basing our discussion on the idea that our words make our world. Right? That's a very basic principle when it comes to a lot of transformational sciences, including NLP and a whole lot of other areas of work. So if words are our world, it also means therefore that incidents happen in our lives, situations occur, people happen. It's the meaning that we give, it's the words with which we describe those incidents, those people, those relationships that ultimately make up our stories, that make up our life. And if we choose to change the meaning at any given point in time, our life story actually changes. Right? In that sense, it's very possible to, in our minds, change our own histories. So we'll explore that aspect today in terms of how do we shift our stories if need be. So here is a description of something, and I'd like us to read through and figure out what that means. So if I have to read it aloud, it says, a newspaper is better than a magazine. A seashore is a better place than the street. At first, it's better to run than to walk. You may have to try several times. It takes some skill, but it's easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Too many people doing the same thing can also cause problems. One needs a lot of room. If there are no complications, it can be very peaceful. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you will not get a second chance. What sense does it make, if at all?
Some beliefs. Just beliefs.
Beliefs, okay. Any other way that we can interpret? Is there a commonality?
Statements.
Okay. Do you see a linkage between the statements?
Some
views.
Some comparisons are shown. Something is better than the other.
Uh-huh. But would you think there's a common thread?
It is a common thread, but how you take
Uh-huh.
in your mind.
Okay?
dependent of your mind.
Hmm.
So your mind and his mind is a different.
Right.
The same meaning or some, he will be get another meaning, and you can get
Yes.
another meaning.
Yes.
So you can't compare for this thing too.
Okay. So, without giving you a sense of what this is about, it seems like random words, right? And some of which we may be able to make meaning of, and we said, it could be beliefs, it could be things that are internal to us, but there's really no common definition amongst us.
Sort of an assertion.
It is an assertion, but probably an unlinked.
Definitely there is common thread, but can't make out it.
Okay.
That's why I told you that it's the thinking of individual.
Yes. Now, if I were to give you a context to this, the context of flying a kite, okay, and I ask you to reread it in the context of flying a kite. A newspaper is better than a magazine. Seashore is better than the street. Right? At first, it's better to run than to walk. You may have to try several times, take some skill, but you can learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds don't get too close very often, but rain soaks it in fast. Many people doing the same thing can cause problems. One needs a lot of room, therefore. If there are no complications, it can be a peaceful exercise. A rock can serve as an anchor for the thread. If things break loose from it, if you lose the anchor, then you may not get a second chance with the kite.
That
Right.
is
Now it
the
match,
requirements.
it match something.
Right?
Then your mind was on that thing. In previously, the mind was open.
Yeah.
In this direction or that direction.
Yeah.
Now there's something concretely you want to fly it. Then go about that thing only.
Yes.
Go follow that thing.
Yeah.
That's me.
Was there a change in content? None, right? That I didn't even change a punctuation between the earlier slide and this one. It's exactly the same.
Apply to successful. What is the requirement for a successful kite flight?
Yes. So there was absolutely no change in words, no change in content at all, right? It's very
Here
similar.
is the title
Yes.
of that paragraph. Fly.
Yeah. And if I were to rephrase the term you used, instead of a title, I gave a certain context, right? And once the context was set, exactly the same words acquired a certain meaning,
yes.
right? And that for us is the power of context. Right? So Werner Erhard, who also who was the initial idea behind the Landmark Forum, he speaks about context being a simple thing. It's as simple as you choosing to create a context that you want in life. Right? Yes, that's Landmark Worldwide. Yeah, the one that they run in Mumbai as well. Yes. So you just need to recognize that you have the power of context, and you need to simply be responsible about managing it and creating it for yourself when you need to, without reason, without somebody else having to tell us that we need to create a context for our lives. We can simply create the context and say, here is what I'm living for, or here is what this relationship means, or here is how I'm going to interpret the situation. We have that power of creating that context. And once that context is set by us, the situation that occurs, the relationship that occurs, is simply like those words out there. They may exactly be the same for two people. However, both of them may interpret it very differently because they may have set very different contexts. Yeah. It's like the story of there's that old story of these twins who grow up with a father who's a drunk, alcoholic criminal,
Yeah.
right? And that there's one of those boys who turns out to be a criminal, and when somebody asks him why, he says, my father was this drunk, alcoholic addict, and what else could I have been? And the other one becomes this extremely benevolent, successful person, and when people ask him, he has the same answer, what else could I have been? Right? And that's the power of context. They both decided to set context very differently. The words in the story were the same, but the context was very different.
What is your meaning? What is your story?
Yes. And the beauty of context is
You decide.
we decide.
That's powerful.
Right? It's an extremely powerful tool, extremely simplistic and yet a very powerful tool for transformation if we have to look back at our own lives and shift the context wherever we believe it can serve us better. So what are the possibilities of context? Virtually anything. We can set any context whatsoever for our life in general, for a particular day, for a particular meeting, for a certain relationship. We can set context for each of these areas of our life as we choose. So for example, we may choose a general context of service. For example, if you look at Mother Teresa, for example, her life context seemed to be service. So in whatever she did, whether it was in terms of interacting with a destitute child or running a hospital or setting up a missionary, the missionaries of charity, that there was the element of service which then directed the action. Exactly the same activities could have been done from the context of power. Right? And the meaning of it would have been very different, and the way the world would have been served through it would have been extremely different. The activities didn't have to change, but the context set by that individual made all the difference. So one may set a context of service. A lot of us set the context of competition in our lives. Everything in our lives is about competition. Also because a lot of times it's an unconscious context. That's how we're trained and educated, right, from school to university. There's competition all over. So when we get into our job, the element, the context with which we walk into work is competition. I need to prove that I'm better than my colleagues. And the context, if it is unconscious, might continue in our relationship. So if I'm with my spouse, I may unconsciously choose to compete just to prove that I'm better than you at something. Right? And that context flows everywhere if we are not aware of what we are doing with it. So the context of competition is something that we see all around. It's an extremely rampant, prevalent context. Sometimes the context is simply survival. For a lot of us who may have had difficult childhoods, financially difficult or otherwise, as a child we set the context that I just want to get through this. I just want to survive and live and then figure out. Right? And when it's set in the unconscious and the child is not aware of it, as an adult the person sometimes just wants to survive. So the way the person works is about just getting by. The way the person would invest in a relationship is just about getting by, make it work without really being too involved. And that applies in every area of our life. Which is where there's the statement that says how you do anything is how you do everything. Because the unconscious context works everywhere. Some of us might use the context of excellence. So we want to be perfect at everything that we do. Right? So I want to be a perfect cook, I want to be a perfect mom, I want to be a perfect professional. And that context drives us. And sometimes the context may not be great for me because in serving that perfection, in serving that excellence, I might be extremely rigid about it. Right? So it becomes important that in each area of our life we choose our context consciously. so that we can build a story accordingly. Otherwise, there's just one frame, one window through which we look at the world, and we lose out on empathy in that process.
You want to say one-way traffic?
It's more than one-way traffic. It's a very tiny lens to view at this wide world, and we really lose out on a lot of perspective there.
In that also you have to think about that thing, so what your aim is there.
Yes.
Then you proceed.
Yes. That is the awareness of the context in terms of, if I'm coming here giving this talk, what's my context here? Why am I doing this? Right? I might do it out of a context of contribution and saying that here's an insight I have and I want to put it out to the world. I might do it from a context of belonging, that there is a need to share and work with it. I might share it from a context of gain, that there is an ulterior motive and I want to gain out of whatever this opportunity provides. The content of the talk might not change, but the energy with which I would give the talk will change depending on what context I set for myself.
Approach will change.
Yes. And therefore, even if that energy is not visible, the way in which it gets received by the world will change. Yes. Yeah. So there are a lot of times where we hear people saying things like, I gave it my best, why doesn't the other person understand? Somewhere the context is not working for them. And that it might help for them to look at what the context is, where are they coming from in that conversation, in that relationship, reset the context, and then perhaps do exactly the same thing again, and the conversation will turn out very differently. So you can have n number of contexts. It's not a limited number. It could be contribution, it could be service, it could be gain, it could be power, performance, excellence, simply survival. It could be the context of safety. Any of these work in different contexts. So yes, there are times in our lives where we may need to set the context for survival, right? So there's nothing right or wrong about a context, so long as we consciously set it for that particular space and time, and be aware of the fact that once that space and time boundary elapses, we also move out of the context. Otherwise, a lot of times contexts that are set in childhood run through our lives, and it doesn't quite work well for us.
It becomes unconscious act.
Yes. Yeah. And the great part of it is it's a really simplistic process, and it's a really internal process. It's a matter of one click saying, okay, here is how I'm going to do this. Here is why I'm going to do this. And once that is set, it really changes our life story. It really changes the way we interpret our own lives, the way we write our own history. So therefore, reflection for today is, what's your context? And it's something I'd urge you to do perhaps later in the day in terms of exploring, is there a general context for life that seems to flow through for you? Or are there different contexts in different areas of your life? Is there a context for a marriage? Is there a context for parenthood, for work, for all other areas of life? Is there a context for health? And if it's unconscious, how can we make it conscious? And is there a possibility of also shifting the context wherever needed? And it's not a great, difficult, complicated process. It's simply a matter of saying, okay, this is what it seems to be so far. That's not where I want to operate from. Let me shift. And that's that. There's no rocket science behind it at all. So if you were to look through a process, if you'd like to share it with somebody else, here's something that you can look at. If you have to look at, and this is something that you can do for your entire life story, you can do it for a certain aspect of your life which you want to rework on. Start off with asking yourself, who are you in that space? So who am I, for example, in my work area. Who am I in my relationship with my partner? Who am I as a mother? Right? Who am I in that space? What is the gift I bring into that particular space of my life? And then the next question about where am I going? And am I going in a direction that's working for me? Am I happy with the relationship that's working? Am I happy with the way my profession is panning out? What's coming in the way? Right? Is there something that's not working there? Right? Am I unhappy about a certain...
Sometimes it is difficult to find out what's not working.
So it could be simply labeling things that you're unhappy about. Right? So for example...
Unnecessary also. Unnecessary also.
What you deem as unnecessary, yes, yeah. Right, so it could be as simple as saying that, okay, I have, let's say I'm talking of a relationship with my parent, and I may say that, okay, who am I? I am a daughter, and I believe I try to be a responsible daughter, and I take care of them as much as I can. So I may name the gift, or I may just know it, that that's all right. Where am I going with it? Perhaps for me, I'm not trying to go anywhere with it. All I'd like for that relationship is to be stable and for us to be in communication and connection. Right? What's coming in the way? I might perhaps say that maybe there are certain aspects of my life choices that I'm unable to communicate openly with my parents. Right? So for example, maybe they'd rather have me focus more on my health or my personal life rather than my work, but I choose to focus on my work, and that conversation doesn't quite happen. Right? And why? What is the obstacle there? The obstacle in this case could be that I perceive that they look through life through a certain lens, which I may label as traditional, and therefore, because there's that assumption running in my mind, the context is one of convincing, right? So when I'm in a conversation with them, somewhere consciously or sometimes even unconsciously, I go ahead with an assumption that I have to convince. They are not going to understand my choices. So the conversation begins with convincing, with the assumption that you're going to disagree with me, so I'm going to start pushing my ideas anyway, right? So if I can shift that context, so the obstacle could be as simple as that, saying that they may not approve of certain choices I make. Could be as simple as that, right? So then how do I shift my context and get there? For the context for me could shift from convincing, persuading, to saying that, okay, let me just go into the relationship with the context of connection. Let me just connect with them as human beings. Right? I don't care if they agree, disagree, approve, disapprove. Let it be. Let me just go share and tell them, okay, here's what I'm doing these days.
Listen
and leave it at that. It's all right if they agree. It's okay if they disagree. It doesn't.
Instead of ignoring,
Yes. So if I shift the conversation, if I shift my context from convincing to simply connection and saying, you're valuable to me, so I want to share. It doesn't matter what the outcome of the sharing is, but let me just share and leave it at that. I might open up to several possibilities that I don't know of otherwise. For all you know, they might understand.
With this approach, they will also shift their...
Yes. At least they would come to a space of saying, all right, she's not trying to bully us into approving of her, but at least she's sharing that here is what's happening in her life, and that there is trust that is built. Now, whether they change their point of view of life or not is immaterial. It doesn't really matter, but at least the connection is built. Right? So, it's not very difficult to identify what's coming in the way. It's simply a matter of looking at what's unpleasant, what's not working in that space of your life, and simply looking at what context can I create. And it could be a very simple context. It's a very humane thing, and all of us know this instinctively. So once we set the context, then it's a matter of saying, okay, now how do I get to that context? What resources will I draw upon? And these are internal resources. Well, if perfection is the context you wish to create, yeah. More than perfection, for me, I connect with it in the sense of being complete. That the choice is completely within me.
That's why starting only I told you, individual is there.
Yes.
The main person is the individual.
Yes.
Then there is the meaning of that.
And that individualism is just so powerful that it can really shift entire lives. So once I set the context, we just put it out there. We go into a conversation, into a room, into a relationship, into workspaces, community spaces with the context in mind, in an aware manner, and do what we have to do and leave the outcome aside. Trusting the fact that it's the energy of the context that people will respond to. It's not so much the activity or the task or the words we use in a conversation. It's the context that people respond to. So that's what I have for you today. So the reason why I called it Story to Satori. Satori is the Zen Buddhist idea of enlightenment. Right? So if we have to shift our story very quickly and in a way that can be extremely transformative, the process is that of using the context.
Be in the flow.
Be in the flow, be aware.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I love what Viktor Frankl says about the pause, right? That between every stimulus and response, there's a pause, and in that space lies our freedom. It's that tiny moment's pause where we can shift the context and it shifts our story. So it says, in that space lies our freedom and the power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. Yes. Viktor Frankl said this in Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah. So that's what I have to offer today.
Very good.
Very good.
Thank you.